Hi there. Titling is a really important part of the work that we do as editors. So being able to create your titles but also to be able to reuse them effectively is a really important skill. In this video, not only am I going to show you how to create your titles in DaVinci Resolve, but I'm also going to show you a technique for saving them as reusable templates that you can use in any project that you're working on. Even better, you can follow along with me in the steps, even if you're using the free version of Resolve. So let's dive in. To start with, Resolve has a number of options for adding titles to your timeline in the edit page, and they can be found in the Effects panel under the Titles category. Believe it or not, these first 5 title generators used to be the only titles available to us in Resolve until Fusion arrived back in version 15. Whilst you can add any of these generators by dragging them directly to the timeline, I usually prefer to double-click them to open them in the source viewer. This way I can use traditional 3-point editing techniques to edit the titles into the timeline. Okay, let's start by highlighting the text and adding my own across 2 lines. Double-clicking the title in the timeline will automatically open the inspector where I can change the font and colour for the first line of text, and choosing a different font and colour for the second line. I'll just adjust the size of both of these lines for a little bit more visual interest and tweak the line spacing to bring them closer together. I'll adjust the rotation angle for the entire title, as well as a slight outline using the stroke control and a gentle drop shadow just for good measure. Well, that's not bad for a couple of minutes work, but it could do with a little bit of animation. As this is where I want my title to end up, I'll add a couple of keyframes here to the zoom and rotation angle controls. Then move backwards towards the start of the clip to adjust their starting positions. I'll also fade the whole title in over about half a second using the opacity handle. Opening the clip's keyframe editor now allows me to reposition the keyframes to get the animation timing just right. I'll just copy and paste each of these keyframes to the end of the title using Command or Control C and V. I'll add a fade out using the handle, as well as use it to refine the timing of the animation for the end of the title. Opening the curve editor, I'll add a small amount of easing to the zoom and rotation keyframes. And this creates a neat little animation for this opening title. Okay, I think you'll agree that this is a pretty awesome title. But what if I wanted to be able to reuse it in a different part of my project? Or maybe in a completely different project entirely? Sure, I could simply copy and paste the title to a new location or timeline, but a quick way to save this title is to drag it from the timeline directly to the media pool, where you can rename it and open it in the source viewer. As you can see, this preserves all the settings, including the keyframes, so I can just edit it directly into the timeline to reuse it, where I can change the title and adjust its animation as needed. And here are a couple of power tips if you want to use this title in any other project you're working on. In the Media Pool's Options menu, choose to show power bins. These bins live outside your project and can be used to store certain elements, like titles, which you can then access in other projects in your project library, whether that's a local, network, or cloud-based library. Simply switch projects and then you'll be able to access the title directly from the Power Bin. From here, you can either add it to your project or edit it into the timeline immediately. And for projects that aren't in the same project library, just right-click on the bin containing your titles and choose Export Bin. This will create a small DRB file that can then be imported into any other project or another set of Power Bins in another project library. And just remember that this isn't actually copying any media. That will need to be managed separately. You can also use the same techniques for any of the other rich text generators, which include the 3 lower third titles as well as the scrolling titles. And although effective, they can be quite limited. But what if you want to have a bit more control over your titles? Well, that's where the Text Plus title comes in. The Text Plus title is actually a Fusion tool that's been repackaged for use in the edit page, and it functions similarly to the titles that we've just seen. And if you're using Resolve 19, you can enable the new Fusion overlays in the timeline viewer to allow you to select and edit the text as well as move it around the screen. Whilst these controls are fine for this simple Text Plus clip, they can become a little bit more fiddly when used with some of the other Fusion titles. However, we can always adjust all of this stuff anyway directly in the inspector. So I'll use the inspector to change the font and resize it as before. But the power of the Text Plus generator is the way that you can customize your titles to a much greater degree. For instance, clicking the Layout tab lets me position the text accurately. And I'll open up the rotation controls to create a bit more perspective to my text. This control treats the text as a whole element. The Transform tab, though, allows me to adjust the text based on individual characters, words, or lines. Double-click a parameter name to reset it. And finally, we get to stylize the text using the Shading tab. The Text Plus tool has up to 8 different shading options for customizing your titles. Now these can be from simple changes like changing the face, adding an outline or a drop shadow, to much more complex looks. I'll begin by changing the face color using the auto-enabled Element 1. Don't worry that it says white solid fill, that's just a reference. But in fact, I'll change the name to face and adjust the color to yellow. If you want a bit more interest to your text, you've got a couple of options. Firstly, you can use the image to load a graphic file directly into the text, where you can adjust the mapping angle, size and aspect, as well as choosing to have the image applied to individual characters, words, lines, or the entire text. Or you can create your own custom gradient using the gradient controls to choose different colors for the gradient, with the same options to change how the gradient is mapped to the title's text. That looks great, but I want my title to stand out a little bit more, so I'm going to apply an outline and a drop shadow. To add an outline, I'll need to enable another shading element. Helpfully, Element 2 automatically adds a red outline, which works well with my warm text. I'll just increase the thickness slightly and maybe back off the intensity of the red. Finally, I'll enable Element 3, a black shadow. I'll adjust the softness and offset slightly and adjust the offset Z to make it appear as though the text is floating a little above the background image. Okay, so that's got the text styled the way I want it. I'll just spend a moment and tidy up the interface so that I can begin animating it with keyframes as I did before. For instance, in the layout, I'll add a keyframe to the center Z and another in the same place to the X rotation. Moving back to the start of the title clip, I'll change the X rotation to around 90 and the center Z to about -0.6. Depending on your system, you may need to enable the render cache to view this back without dropping frames. So I'll just give Resolve a moment to cache this part of the timeline. Well, if I say so myself, that's looking pretty good. although I think the animation is still a little bit too slow. Unfortunately, I can't adjust the pacing of the keyframes directly in the edit page. Because the Text Plus is a Fusion tool, I'll need to use Fusion. But don't worry, it is very straightforward. To open this title in Fusion, I just need to click this button at the top of the inspector. And that automatically switches me to the Fusion page. And here you can see I have my Text Plus template with all of the same controls available in the inspector. I'll just switch to single view for this. In the time ruler, you may be able to see these smaller, thicker vertical white lines. These represent the position of the keyframes for the selected tool, which is my Text Plus template. In order to modify the position of the keyframes, I'll need Fusion's keyframe editor, which opens to the side of the node editor. I'll start by clicking this zoom to fit control so things are easier to see. And if I toggle open the template, you can see I've got my keyframes here. I'll select the last two keyframes and bring them back to increase the speed of the animation, as well as tidying up the beginning keyframes. That seems a little better. And just for good measure, I'll open the spline editor. Again, I'll enable the template to see the keyframes and click zoom to fit. Then select the last two keyframes and click to smooth them both. Okay, that deals with the opening animation, and it's easy to reverse it for the end of the clip. Back in the keyframe editor, I'll select the two keyframes for the center Z parameter, right-click and choose to copy them. And for the moment, I'll paste them here by right-clicking and choose Paste. Then I'll do the same for the angle X keyframes. Though of course the animation needs to be reversed. So I'll select the keyframes and simply press V on my keyboard to reverse them. Scrubbing through, it now shows that my animation is running in the right direction. I'll now just reposition those keyframes to the end of the title so that they animate out at the right time. With the animation finessed, I can now return to the edit page to see how it all looks. Again, giving the timeline a moment to cache if necessary. And I can also save this to my templates power bin in the same way as before. Understanding a basic title like this is very useful when it comes to working with the other Fusion titles that are available in the edit page. As with most elements in the effects panel, the Fusion titles can be previewed by moving your mouse back and forth over the title. For this example, I'm going to use the horizontal line reveal for the end of my current edit. Let's start by editing this into my timeline using a place on top edit. In the inspector, I'll change the upper text to the website address. Bring the size down and change it to a gradient. Let's adjust the lower text and simply adjust its spacing. And finally, I'll change the line to roughly the same color as the main text. You may have noticed that some of these controls are very familiar. Indeed, many of them are from the same Text Plus tool that I've been working with and have just been made available as part of this Fusion title. Of course, we can always access the full range of controls directly in the Fusion page. But before we go there, I just want to show you something annoying about this particular title. Do you see the problem? The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that the line doesn't animate off. I think somebody simply forgot to do this, but we can fix it. So let's start by opening the title in the Fusion page. Now I can access all the other controls not made available in the edit page. If I double click this group of tools to expand them out, I can select the upper text tool and make further adjustments to the shading gradient, such as changing the mapping angle, a control that was not available to me for this Fusion title in the edit page. I'll change the mapping level of the gradient to the text as a whole and adjust the mapping angle so that it matches the direction of the gradient of the line. I can also add an outline by enabling shading element 2, though let's make this a black outline rather than red. In the keyframe panel, I can see the keyframes for the animated elements. This is where they are at the start of the title, and here they are for the end. And here's the line mask that specifies the length and animation of the line. And you may be able to see there are no keyframes animating it out. Okay, this may seem a little confusing because the end keyframes are actually well beyond the end of the title itself, but that's only because this is a title template. And it has something called a keyframe stretcher applied, and that tool will hold the title between two particular points. This means that you can then change the duration of the title directly on the timeline, and you still get the animation in as well as the animation out. For this title template then, the end animation is actually happening at this point, frame 134. Not the end of the title as you'd expect, but the keyframe stretcher brings those keyframes in at the end of the title in the edit page timeline. Still with me? Good. Okay, let's start off by right-clicking the line mask tool and choosing to select the previous keyframes. Pressing Command or Control C now copies those keyframes. I'll now select the width control and paste the keyframes back in where the rest of the template animates out. And finally, I'll choose Reverse to swap them around. Now, if I scrub through the end of the title, you can see how the line finally animates out. Let's just return to the edit page and see it play in all its glory. And I can also add this title to my collection in the Power bin. As always, if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. There's also a link in the description to download the DRB file that features all of the templates that I've made in this video. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, take care.